Now it's my pleasure to introduce this afternoon's speaker, Kathy Hanselman from TMCC. Kathy is an instructor of English at Truckee Meadows Community College. For over 10 years, she has worked as an instructional designer for online courses, which sparked her interest in the intersection of education and technology. She is particularly interested in how generative AI can be in course design to support instructors' creativity and innovation. While she acknowledges that AI can feel intimidating at first, she sees its potential to open up new avenues for exploration and teaching, especially in developing engaging and meaningful course materials and learning activities. So, with that, I'll hand things over to Kathy to talk to us about using generative AI for course design.
Awesome. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Kathy. Just to give you a little bit more introduction to myself, I was an instructional designer at UNR for about 10 years before coming to TMCC, where I now teach full time. So in full disclosure, this is the third time I've given a version of this workshop. And it's been like every last 3 falls, and every time I work with AI to update it and make it better. And with that, I've been able to see kind of how the AI tools have gotten better in the last 3 years. And just looking at the original version of this from even not original, last year's version of this, things have gotten a lot better. And I'm seeing a lot more, the prompts that are given and the feedback that's given is a lot easier to work with, a lot more approachable. So hopefully that works out for you guys and that you guys have a similar experience. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. If anybody has any questions about things as we're going, just drop them in the chat. My plan is to kind of go through some of the just kind of getting to know the idea of generative AI for course design, and then go through a couple of different types of course design steps you could use. So developing learning outcomes, assignment prompts, rubrics, and lesson planning from that. So for each of those sections, we can kind of stop and see if anybody has any questions, or if you prefer, we can all chat at the end. So let me go ahead and share the screen. Here we go. All right, are you guys all seeing a PowerPoint? All right, okay, perfect. So, and here you guys can see my email. I believe that's probably listed on the conference materials as well, if anybody wants to get in touch with me about any of the things that you're seeing here today. All right, so by the end of this session, I'm hoping that you guys can have a better understanding of basically how to employ generative AI to different aspects of course design. So some of the benefits and considerations you might think about in deciding to use AI to help design your courses, using AI to develop things like learning outcomes, assignment and discussion prompts, rubrics, and lesson plans. And then also thinking a little bit about how to work with that AI generated information. So it's not just something that you copy and paste directly into your class, that you're still participating in the process and deciding what works and what looks good. All right. So why should we be using generative AI in course design? Well, I'm not going to say you should. I'm just going to say it's something to consider. I think that it's up to every instructor to decide for themselves what's going to work best for their students in their class. But you may consider using generative AI in your course design to, I think one of the first things that we think of is it really does help speed up the process. It saves time on early drafts and really that brainstorming aspect of things, getting ideas out of your head onto paper or onto screen that you can work with from there. Really helpful for me. I'm Quality Matters trained. I think that a lot of us at INSHE are definitely at TMCC, is this idea of aligning your course and making sure that the learning outcomes are at the center of everything that you're doing, and making sure that those learning outcomes are well designed and that your assignment materials align with them, that your lesson materials align with those learning outcomes. I think that generative AI is a really great place to get inspiration when you're stuck. If you're kind of like, okay, I've done this for the last 10 years. What can I do to kind of make it a little bit more interesting? Make it more interesting for me, my students in 2025, current events, things like that. It's also helpful to overcome some of those issues that we may have as instructors in making our courses as accessible as possible. As you know, that we need to be making things accessible, but sometimes things like writing alternative text for images can just be, well, a ton of time, and it can be really difficult. So using a tool that can kind of help at least get you something to start with for these accessibility tasks that we need to do, really helpful. And most importantly, I think it helps free up your time and your energy to focus on that pedagogy, interacting with your students, be it in class or via feedback, announcements, email, in your online classes, whatever it may be. There's just a little bit more time for you to focus on that actual teaching and the teaching of your class. All right, so one of the big focuses that I want to have here is that AI is not the be all end all. It shouldn't be doing everything for you. It's a co-designer. It's not a replacement for you. You're still the star of the class here. So think of it in a couple of different roles for you. As a brainstorming partner to help you generate those initial ideas, as a design assistant, so helping to connect outcomes and activities and assessments. And again, thinking about that alignment with learning outcomes throughout your course, keeping the design as tight as possible. If you've ever worked with an instructional designer, lucky you. I used to be an instructional designer, and I think that it's a really helpful way to have another set of eyes on your class to coach you and help you make the best class possible. If you don't have access to an instructional designer, because there aren't a million of them around, looking at AI as a designer who can kind of give you feedback and guidance is really helpful as well. Also helpful as a writing helper. So helping make sure that your drafts actually are clear and clear to your students too. Thinking like, okay, I'm an expert in my field. I'm an expert in this topic, but I maybe am used to using maybe a little bit too high level of jargon or explanation, or I think this makes sense, but my 100 level students maybe won't. Having your AI kind of work with you to be, okay, how can I reframe what I'm writing so it will land with my students? And then even just as an instructor yourself outside of the classroom, using it as a reflection tool. So prompting you to think a little bit outside of the box about what you've done, what went well, and what may be improved in the future. So basically just relying on it as a teammate, not as a replacement for you in the classroom. All right, I'm sure by this point, all of us, maybe not all of us, but most of us have probably played with at least an AI tool or two and have some experience with prompting. Just a couple of different prompting tips to get you started in case you haven't worked with it. There are a handful of things that will kind of set the scene to get the best output possible. And a couple of those are, first of all, to be as specific as possible. So include your course level, the topic, the purpose of the thing that you're asking for. I work with ChatGPT generally. I'm not paying for it either. I'm just using the free version. But I generally start every prompt that has to do with my course design. I'm teaching an English 101 class online, freshman composition. This week we're working on topic X, introductions. And then it's kind of framing with that very specifically what we're dealing with. You can set the rule for the AI tool to act as something. So act as a curriculum designer, act as an online instructor, act as a feedback coach. You'll want to define the format. So what do you actually want it to kick out? You don't have to do this, but if you're looking for a specific format like bullet points or paragraphs, a table, it's best to state that. If you don't, the output's going to give you something that you can come back and say, oh, just kidding. Can you please make this into a table? It's helpful to add criteria, like making sure that you're using things like Bloom's taxonomy of outcomes, verbs, tone, focus, things like that. And really important is to remember that you need to be there. You don't always need to revise the output, but you need to always think about revising the output. Read it closely and don't just trust what that AI tool is giving you. You may need to come back and go through these prompts again to get a little bit more of what you want. All right, so thinking about responsible use of AI in teaching is just making sure that you're not relying on the AI tool 100%. So I'm going to keep kind of coming back to this is you can't rely on the AI tool 100%. It's your teammate, right? So it may draft something, but you're the one who designs it. And you're also the one who decides what to do with it and how to deploy it and how to actually give it to your students. You need to be 100% involved in making sure that you're verifying accuracy and relevance of what the AI tool is giving you. Again, you're the expert in the field here. You need to make sure that this stuff that's coming from the AI tool is actually what you asked it to give you and that it aligns with what you know of your field and what you're doing. I've had some experiences where it kind of kicks back things and I'm like, that's not at all what we were going for here. That's not at all this area that we're focusing on. So sometimes it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to rely on the AI tool for this. I'm going to move on and just do this all myself. Or you can kind of go back and forth with the AI tool to kind of pull it in the direction that you're looking for or add your own input into it to see how you can improve that accuracy. I think it's really important in all instruction to keep your students at this time in your class in mind. So looking at the outputs, it kind of is going to give you general outputs for students in 2025. Being really cognizant of, okay, these are 100 level students, or these are 100 level students at a community college versus a state university, or how much they know, what kind of information they are already bringing to the table. You also need to look at those outputs and say, will my students, the ones who are sitting in my 9:30 a.m. class on Tuesday, that I know how they're interpreting things, are they actually going to get this? Is this going to work with them? Are these activities going to make sense for them in that class? So keeping your students in mind is very important. I think it's important to be transparent with your students. If you've used AI in many ways in the class, I will let you know that I think I already did let you know that I used AI to help put together this presentation. Hopefully it doesn't make it seem like I don't know what I'm doing. I think that for my students, it's kind of like letting them know, okay, all of us are kind of relying on the tools we have available. This isn't 100% AI, but it's bringing in and giving me new ideas to better deliver this information to you. And as always, you want to make sure that you're keeping pedagogy at the center. So actually really thinking about how you're helping your students achieve what they need to in your class first and foremost. If AI is not serving that purpose, then it shouldn't be part of your process. All right. One of the biggest takeaways is keeping yourself as the center of this. So good design with AI isn't linear. It's never going to be, hey, ChatGPT, give me this. Okay, good to go. Let me drop it in my class. There's always a loop to it. And you as a human need to be in the loop. You guys have probably heard the term human in the loop. Definitely want to keep it going with this. So it's something where you may kind of loop around, where I'm going to ask ChatGPT to give me something, get the output, and then say, okay, let me fix that. Let me fix that. Let me iterate with you a little bit more to get a little bit closer to what I actually have envisioned. All right, so and this is a ChatGPT framework that they came up with, that we came up with. I went back and forth a couple of times to kind of get it where I wanted to. But the idea of raise, so root in your learning outcomes. All learning activities and aspects of your class should always come back to those learning outcomes. What your students should be able to do at the end of this learning event. Ask the AI for a draft, and then interpret it and improve. That's where the instructor comes in, where you actually need to be an active part of this, saying like, that doesn't make sense. That's not exactly what I was looking for. Can you add this? Let's do a slide on this. Send back for refinement, and then evaluate and experiment. So kind of going back and forth there in that AIS section where you're kind of saying, okay, let's go back and forth with a couple of different prompts to get a little bit closer to what I want. And then making sure that you actually do look at the finished project and say, okay, this actually will work for my students. Is this how they would answer this? Is this how they would respond to this? And it may even take the first time that you actually deploy that. So the first time you do a discussion in your online class to say, oh, I didn't realize they would not quite understand this one thing. So it may be something that's not going to be something you can take care of 100% perfect the first go around. But I think that most times we're trying new learning experiences in our classes, we have to kind of be open for that. Maybe it's not going to go 100% the way we wanted to the first time anyway. All right, so with all of that, I think I can jump into a couple of the different areas that I want to talk about. Again, we're going to cover learning outcomes, assignment prompts, rubrics, and lesson planning. So for each of these, I'm going to kind of go through how AI can help you with this, and then a step-by-step process. And then I'm going to provide some sample prompts along those step-by-steps. I'm not going to take too much time. I'm not going to read the prompts to you because hopefully you guys can all read them yourself, and I'll make the PowerPoint available to you. But it's kind of a lot of wording on the screen. I know that we shouldn't really be going for that, but a lot of people have asked me for these prompts in the past. So just so you kind of know my process. So looking at learning outcomes, we all know learning outcomes are kind of the basis of all of our instruction. Coming back to what do we want our students to be able to do at the end of this learning event or this class or this program or our degree program. So thinking about what do we actually see as the outcomes. A lot of us are going to have those handed to us by our departments or by the university or the institution. So maybe you already have some that you have been given. Maybe you have some that are from your department. Maybe you're coming up with some of your own, or maybe you're coming up with some of your like weekly outcomes to support those larger course outcomes. So let's talk that through a little bit. Why would you want to use AI for learning outcomes? I think it can be really helpful in writing those measurable outcomes. It can be really challenging to be thinking up those terms, those Bloom's taxonomy action verbs that we can actually say, okay, what can I do to actually measure my students' learning of this? That can almost be half the battle, right? Coming up with the right verbs to communicate what you want. AI is pretty good at pulling those. You're probably still going to want to go back in and kind of fiddle with them and make them say exactly what you want, but it's a great place to start. AI can translate those vague objectives, things like you can see here from my English class, understand rhetoric, pretty nebulous. We don't really know how students are going to demonstrate that understanding, right? It can make it more specific and accessible, something like analyze rhetorical appeals in a written text, something where I can actually say, oh, I can put that into a rubric and I can say, did they analyze rhetorical appeals in a written text? Check, good to go. It helps to ensure that vertical alignment. So looking at things from your program outcome to your course outcome to your weekly outcomes, showing it in assignments and activities that they do to support those, really making that really tight alignment from top to bottom in the course. And again, coming back to the AI can suggest those Bloom's aligned verbs or other verbs that can just be that very actionable. Making sure that you're also going from, okay, I don't just want my students to be doing recognized type activities and things like that. Let's get it to those higher levels of cognition. So here are a couple of steps that you could use. And again, these are just to get you started. I think that for most of us, if you got going with this, you jump in and have maybe 5 more steps in here that are very specific to your class and your needs. So starting out, you'd want to ask the tool to brainstorm some general learning outcomes, and then from there, create some sub-outcomes, what can build towards the larger outcomes. Make sure that they actually align with what you're doing in your course overall, with what you should be achieving over the course of the semester. Make sure that you refine for that measurability. What can you actually do to show that students have this learning by the end of the activity or the end of the unit? And then make sure that you're checking for clarity. So for each of these different sections that I'm going to go over, the last step is definitely for you. It's not a prompt, it's a me, the instructor. I need to go back and actually check for clarity, use my eyeballs to make sure that this makes sense and is what I wanted out of it. Okay, so here's a couple of different examples that you can be able to see. Pretty basic. I think that, and these aren't following those tips that I gave you for effective prompting at the beginning of this. Theoretically, you would have already started kind of the conversation with your tool saying like, this is for my English 101 class, this is an online class, my students are having problems with XYZ, or I'm aiming to have them focus on this semester. But you can see that these kind of can show you just really broadly where you can get started. So brainstorming, just generate 6 learning outcomes for this type of course. And then taking that, very specifically sub outcomes. So looking at, okay, to support those 6 larger outcomes, what are 10 sub outcomes for each one of them? Really break it up into smaller nuts and bolts that you can then, focus on each of those individually. Make sure that it's aligning with the course objectives. You provide the AI tool with your course objectives and say, here's my course objectives. Here's the outcomes we've just been talking about. What do these align with? What am I missing? What can I add to this? What needs to be added to this? And then again, making sure that the outcomes are including things like observable, measurable verbs. That's really helpful when you actually get into moving from the outcomes to building your activities and building your assignments. They actually need to be measurable, things that you can see them do in those activities and assignments. All right, does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about learning outcomes? I'm not sure if I'm seeing any. Nope. All right, maybe if you guys have some at the end. All right, let's move on to talking about assignment and discussion prompts. And the way that I'm moving through this is kind of intentional. If you're thinking about the backwards design process, always starting with learning outcomes and then thinking about, okay, how am I going to assess their learning? Looking at assignment prompts. How am I going to measure that? Looking at rubrics. And then how am I going to support that? That's what I'm going to design my lesson based on. All right, so looking at assignment discussion prompts, I've kind of lumped these two together. Mostly if you're kind of looking at assignments, you could start with assignments, get ideas, and then you could say, okay, ChatGPT, we're doing this as an online discussion, an asynchronous discussion for my English 101 students. How will we adjust this assignment to fit the discussion modality? And I can talk a little bit more about that at the end of this section because I've got some thoughts on it. In general, why would you use AI for prompt creation, for creating your assignment prompts? Helps you to save time. Again, we're going to keep coming back to that. But the brainstorming diverse and scaffolded prompts, I think that one of the ways I look at AI is it's looking at what's out there all over the place. So all of the other people who have published their English 101 syllabus or their English 101 rhetorical analysis assignment prompt, it's looking at a lot of different materials. So it's almost a way for me to peek into other teachers' like lesson planning booklets and see what they've got going on. So there's a lot of different things that we've gotten from working with our fellow faculty in our departments, people that we've taught with in the past, looking at our listservs and things like that. But this is just giving us way more. And I think that most instructors are happy to share. It's just, this is going to make it a little bit easier to get it delivered to you when you're doing your lesson planning and you're assignment planning at 2 o'clock in the morning, pulling it from the internet. So again, saves time with that brainstorming. It helps you to get over any blocks that you might be having. Like, I'm not sure how to get from here to here in this assignment. Give me some ideas to get past this. It can help you adapt that one idea to a different aspect. So going from an in-person class to an online version of an assignment or a discussion, going from an assignment to a asynchronous discussion post, or maybe something like in my face-to-face class, we do these presentations. How can I do a similar thing in my online class? Let's talk it through. Let's come up with a prompt. Let's come up with examples that my students can do. And again, it comes back to that idea of aligning. So aligning your assignment prompts to your learning outcomes. And then it could even suggest, okay, if I have my students achieving this learning outcome by demonstrating it by doing this activity, what do I need to give them in class to make sure that they're able to do it? What lesson planning and readings do I need to provide, which I'll get to in a little bit. Basically, it's giving you that top to bottom alignment. So steps to generate assignment or discussion prompts, pretty basic. And again, you're going to go back and forth on a lot of these. It's even if you follow these step by step, you're probably going to have to do 20 more prompts in between to get down to what you really want. So start with brainstorm general ideas, then generate the overall assignment prompt, then break it down into specific tasks or questions to get students kind of thinking about what they can do step by step. If you need to, you can tailor for different learning levels. You can ask the tool to generate sample responses for you so that you can show to your students, like, this is what your response might look like. And then, of course, still back to you as the instructor, required to check for clarity and coherence and making sure that it's actually achieving what you want it to do. So here's a handful of example prompts for you. So brainstorming ideas, this is a great one. Just generate 10 possible assignment ideas for this topic. Let's just throw it all at the wall and let's see what I like. Okay, I like 1, 7, and 8. Give me more detail on each of those ones. Explain this a little bit more. What can we do with this? I find this really helpful to be like, okay, let's just see what's out there and kind of I can go from there, pick the one that sounds better, and then we can go drill further. Right? You can actually have it create that prompt. So more detail, but you could say, this is student facing. I want this to go to my English 100 students or my English 400 students who are a little bit more used to the terminology. You can prompt it so it's facing the students that you're working with. I think that breaking down into specific tasks or questions is especially helpful for you as the instructor to plan out how you're going to scaffold in class. So what are we going to do in this week, in that week, in the next week that's going to get us to the final deadline for this? It also could be preparing students to do those steps on their own, depending on what level you're working with. But it can make it so they actually almost have a checklist to get them from zero to getting the material done. It can alleviate a lot of that student's stress of like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't even know where to get started. So giving them that kind of step-by-step can be very helpful. Tailor for different learning levels. If you're looking at a type of activity that you remember from maybe grad school, but you're like, okay, I want to get my 200 level students excited about this too. How can we move something that I remember doing to this lower level? Or for myself, I'm teaching English 101 and English 100, our co-requisite kind of developmental version of 101. I'm having them do the same assignments in general, but there's a lot more scaffolding underneath each of those assignments. So kind of like, even though they're very similar levels, I can work with the tool to say, okay, what do my developmental students need in addition to what I'm giving to my 101 students? And then again, generating sample responses can be really helpful. I've had students when I provided responses to, this is what your discussion response should look like, even just seeing like how long it's supposed to be, and maybe just a couple of the things they're supposed to cover. I've had students reach out and say, this is one of the most helpful things I've had in an online class. The only thing I suggest about with this, being wary of, is that I don't want our students to end up writing like they are an AI tool. So just being aware that, like saying the writing here isn't as important as kind of the structure or the ideas you're covering, or making sure that you're hitting all the points as this sample has, rather than trying to sound like ChatGPT. But it is very helpful. Okay, so that was assignment prompts. So coming up with, here's the paper we're going to write. Once your students have written the paper, or hopefully before you actually ask them to write it, you give them the prompt and then hopefully the rubric to show them what they're going to be graded on. What exactly is it that they're going to receive points for? That should be really clear in the assignment prompt. And ChatGPT at least is really good at saying, this is what you're going to be graded on. But a rubric is a way that you can really clearly show it to them. Students are used to seeing rubrics. If you're working with Canvas, which I think most of us in NG are, you can build the rubrics directly into the Canvas assignments, discussions, whatever it may be. So looking at this, you can actually, I think that the AI tools do a pretty good job of giving you a base. I think that this is one of the areas where you really do need to come in and make a lot of changes for yourself and what you want to be looking for with your students' work. All right, so why use AI for rubric design? Again, what that saves time. It gives you that first draft. I know that for me, at least, coming up, getting the ideas out of paper into a table, I'm sorry, out of my head into a table on paper could get really difficult. And I think that just getting some terminology down that you can then fiddle with, move around, change, decide what's important, decide how many points you want to work with, just having something to look at to begin with can be very helpful. Again, it comes back to that alignment, that idea of, okay, how does this, what I'm doing in this paper, what I'm grading them on, how does it actually relate to what they're going to be graded on for finishing the course in general? How does it relate to them demonstrating their learning for the course? So that alignment idea. It helps you to ensure that consistent language across assignments. It's helpful to see, for students, they always know that maybe the last criterion in a rubric is always that mechanics and what you're looking for, and they get used to that from paper to paper. But just in general, the type of terminology and the things that you focus on, if they see that on 4 different major projects, they're going to be like, oh, I remember how she worked with this on the first one. I remember how she worked with this on the second one. It's just that consistent language helps students to feel a little bit more like they know what's going on from the get-go. You can play a little bit with tone or format, formal, informal. It's something that you generally would want to be student facing. So you want students to actually be able to understand what you've written. So it shouldn't maybe be those super high level educational verbs, but more things that what students would understand. Making it so it's something like, oh, I see that I need to use 3 sources, not like demonstrate an understanding of the appropriate number of sources for a research paper, something like that. Make it something that they can really get to. So that informal or formal. The format you can look at, okay, is this going to really look at bit by bit, individual things, individual aspects of maybe something like working responsibly with sources, or is it going to bit by bit say that a student has introduced a source response or with signal phrases? Is it going to have an in-text citation? Things like that, where you can really dig into individual aspects of it. And then the scale, if you want it to be 5, excellent, good, proficient, needs improvement, or if you just want it to be good, middle, poor. I mean, obviously you could think of the different scales that work best for you. I like to use kind of a smaller number of scales just so that it fits a little bit better on my screen when I'm grading with the Canvas speed grader. That's just me though. All right, and then I think that just a vote for using rubrics in general, they're really helpful for supporting equity and transparency for your students. So making sure that you're grading every student the same because you're using a rubric is going to help you make sure that you're giving the same points for the same actions for all students across the board. So just rubrics in general, not just AI. All right, here's some steps to generate a grading rubric. So start with that initial grading rubric draft, align the rubric to outcomes, clarify the performance descriptors, adjust for level or context, format for your different uses if you need them, and then check for correctness and clarity. And you can see my note over here to the lower right. There's still no way to upload a completed rubric into Canvas. We've all wanted it basically since whenever we got Canvas, right? You can't just take a Word document and load it up and it'll build a rubric for you. So you do still have to go criterion by criterion and copy paste from whatever you're working with. So just be aware of that. All right, so here's a couple of example prompts for this. You guys can see just create a 4-level rubric for this prompt and just copy and paste your paper prompt into the tool. And then say some specific things. Criteria should reflect this type of understanding, use of evidence, organization, writing quality. Maybe it's going to be a lot longer than that. Maybe this is just where you get started and then you say, oh, let's split up that sociological understanding into 3 separate criterion. All right, then align rubric to outcomes. So here's my course outcomes. Show me what's showing up here. Show me what's not showing up here. Show me how this could be changed to better align with those course outcomes. Looking at clarifying your performance descriptors, so making sure that the performance levels are more specific and measurable and clear to your students. So what exactly do they need to be doing for each of these levels to make it clear to them what they should be aiming for? You could look at adjusting the rubric to different levels. This could be something if you actually had a rubric from a different class and you're like, oh, I'm going to start using it in my 200 level class, copy and paste, help me adjust this 200 level rubric down to my 100 level rubric. And then thinking about if you wanted to have it instead of it being, a point by point rubric that was just kind of this is what I'm going to grade you on, and I want open-ended feedback, a space for that at the back of it. Or if I want this created almost more like a checklist than a rubric, the AI tools can help you make that kind of a distinction a little bit easier. All right, this is a sample output from me just playing with an AI tool when I was working on this presentation. So you can see it's not 100% great, but it gives us something to get started with, right? I'm not teaching sociology, so I can't 100% say this is great, but you can see, hey, there's something for each of these. Each criterion has 4 different levels showing it. It makes sense. I think that we've got some pretty good action verbs that students could probably understand. I might say take this and try to make it a little bit more my 100 student facing, but it'd be up to you what you were looking for with this. But you can see it gives you something to work with, right? Not too bad. All right. So the last area that I wanted to cover is coming up with lecture plans. So for this, you may be looking at like, okay, I have a 75-minute class. Help me plan that out, time-wise, or things that I should cover. Or I have really great lectures myself, but I'd like to get more active learning in. I'd like to have more activities interspersed with the content that I'm covering. Or I have really great activities. What are some reminder content that I can include here? So basically just working with the tool to say, how can I plan things out? You may, if you're thinking about teaching online, work with the tool too to say, okay, take me from this lecture plan to help me to develop maybe some lecture videos. I'm not saying ask ChatGPT to record videos for you. You definitely need to be involved with that. But something where it's like, okay, help me to plan out some PowerPoints. Help me to figure out what kind of visuals I can include here. And then help me to put together a script. I've done that a little bit. It does take a lot of instructor in the loop to make it make sense. But we'll start with just kind of looking at the idea of lecture plans in general. All right, so why use it for lecture planning? Again, with the speeding up, gives you that first draft to work with, gives you some ideas. Generally, it's probably not going to be perfect. It's not going to be what you want out of it the very first time. You're really going to need to get in there and involved and say, my students have always needed a little bit more to get started, or we need a little bit more to bridge idea A to idea B. A big thing for me is I like all of my students to take some time to write before we get going with the topic that we're going to dive into. So I always have to say, whoa, 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 let's stop everything. Let's come up with some writing journal prompts before we get into the actual lecturing. Really good at coming back to the alignment with the outcomes and the assignments. So the assignments are testing how well they've learned the outcomes. In order to achieve the assignments, what do you need to give them in terms of what you give in class or in your lecture videos or your readings? You can even ask for kind of hints on what types of readings you can search for if you're not working with a textbook. Really helpful though to make sure that you're actually providing students with the tools to achieve the assignments to demonstrate their learning. Really helpful for generating examples, analogies, discussion questions that deepen engagement. One of the biggest things for me is sometimes in the moment, I can come up with one example and that's it. And my students may need 2 or 3 to really have the idea stick with them. So being able to have just a handful of different examples or case studies or sample paragraphs that students can work with is really helpful. And it means that I don't have to come up with all of that on my own, especially for new instructors starting out when you haven't had the time to build up this, plethora of ideas to work with. It can give you at least some things to kind of have in your back pocket and ready to talk about. And I think that it's really helpful for supporting universal design for learning. With this, it means the idea of multiple modes of representation. So thinking about, okay, some verbal explanations, maybe I've got some slides that the AI tool has helped me kind of figure out what I want to include on slides or what I need to include, suggesting visual things that can be included as well. So not just me speaking about it, but maybe, oh, don't forget to include a picture of the water cycle. And it's like, oh, well, that would definitely help, wouldn't it? And then also thinking about the different activities to get students interacting with the content as you're giving it to them. All right, so our steps for generating lecture plans: define your topic, create a rough outline, align it to your outcomes, generate those explanations or examples, think about adjusting for level as needed, creating visuals or slide ideas, generating those quick activities to intersperse, kind of fiddling with that and making sure that they fit well and that your students would actually like them and work with them. And then again, with your last step, to review that it actually makes sense. The content that it's giving you makes sense, and that it flows well in how you would actually like to present it in your class. So there's a lot on these slides. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to give you an idea, based on this English 101 class where we're working on this, today we're going to be talking about the rhetorical appeals. I need a 75-minute lecture on this. It needs to have at least 3 active learning activities where students are going to talk to their peers and work together and then come back to the class with these different things. So these are all the different things I want to feed into it and then just see what comes out. If you get an outline, you can then say, okay, let's take out section 2 and redo it, or make section 2 10 minutes longer. Let's go way more into detail with this. And you can have it actually give you, wording, but you're probably going to use this more as like, okay, I'm gonna have the outline in front of me, lesson plan style, and I'm going to expound upon this myself, right? You can have the tool help you create PowerPoint slides, and the current version of ChatGPT will offer, like, would you like me to create this as a PowerPoint? Every time I do that, it's just a disaster. Like I said, I'm not paying for the version of it, so maybe if I did, it would turn out better. But it makes really ugly, boring PowerPoints, and I prefer to take the ideas, mush them around in my own head, and then create my own PowerPoints, kind of screen to screen, where it's like looking at the ideas, but adding my own kind of flair to it. All right, again, aligning to lecture outcomes, so making sure that these outcomes that I'm providing align with what I'm actually achieving here in this lecture. Making sure that make notes where I can add more or where I'm missing the point on them. Again, with the generate explanations and examples, so maybe more ways of explaining the same thing. Here, give me an analogy that I can give my students, give me 2 analogies, give me an example that I can give that will help drive this point home. All right, and then adjusting for level, I'm not sure. It really depends on how you need this to happen. How maybe you see the prompt, or I'm sorry, the lesson focus that comes through being a little bit more what you would deliver to your 400 level students, and you're thinking this would not hit with my 100 level students. We need more explanation. We need more definition of terms and things like that. So making sure that you are asking for what you want and making sure that your level that you're teaching is represented really well. Creating visuals, I'm not one to really work with like DALL-E or any of the visual creation tools at this point, but I do ask the tool to give me a suggestion, and then I will either create for myself, so creating tables or word art, whatever it may be in Microsoft, or going out and searching the internet for images that kind of fit what the tool is suggesting. So it's a great way to jazz up the PowerPoint. You guys can tell that I did not do that for this session. There's just too much to cover on each slide. But it can help for your students just have something that's that is aligned with what you're talking about, actually supports what you're doing. So it's not just decorative images on your slide, but they can kind of liven up a presentation. And then generate quick activities. So just some little things to keep your students engaged. In an online class, if you were recording videos, then it might be something like, okay, here's some reflection questions for my students to think about as I leave them on this 5-minute video. Or it could be think, pair, shares for in class, or activities that I want to take a half an hour that can, we're going to do a quick mini lesson. And then let's blow this up into a big activity that we can do within class where they can work through this material that I just presented. All right. So just a handful of additional considerations. We're kind of getting towards the end here, but things that I want you to keep in mind for across all of this is that you're still the star of the show. The instructor is still number one. It's still your class and your students that you're trying to reach. So it's really important that you keep accuracy in mind, and it's your responsibility to check that. You're the star, you're the talent, you have the know-how. The AI may look like it knows what it's talking about, but it doesn't always. So you need to make sure that you're doing that accuracy check throughout. And then also thinking about coming back to that idea of how will this reach my students? How will this sit with them? How will this actually work with those students who sit in the back in my 9:30 class who are having a hard time paying attention as it is? Okay, what ChatGPT just suggested might work for a student of super engaged 4 level students who are totally into this topic. How do I get these students in this class more engaged? So again, not just accuracy, but knowing what you do about your students, what's going to work and what's not. And then really important, the voice and presence. You as an instructor are what your students are here to see, right? They're not, we hear our students say all the time, like, if I could have just read the textbook for this. And it's like, well, not really, can you? Because if you did just read the textbook and you could have gone with that, then I guess that you could have saved thousands of dollars. But you're here to hear from me, the expert on this, the person who is not just giving you the information, but working with you to help build your understanding and build your learning. So that voice, that presentation, you as the human in front of the classroom is really important, making sure that you're actually seen as that human there too. So your teaching style matters. And if it's something that's worked for you for this long, it's something you want to make sure that AI is not going to push you out of the way and take over. And you're going to become AI's robot personified in the classroom. Just keeping in mind those AI drafts, they're scaffolds, they're not scripts. It's not telling you exactly what to say, it's giving you ideas that you can then expound upon yourself. And also just keeping in mind that accessibility always should be in the back of our minds or in the front of our minds, actually, as we're giving students materials. Making sure that if you are getting materials from the AI tool, that you are ensuring they're accessible. I think more importantly is keeping the AI tool as in mind as a way to achieve the accessibility goals that you have for your class. So again, thinking about things about how you can use AI to come up with alt text or images, description of the images. If you were like recording a video, you're supposed to describe the image so that any students who may not have the visual ability to see it perfectly, they can at least hear your description of it and understand it better. The AI tool is going to do a good job of helping you kind of crutch yourself through that if you're not having an easy time doing it yourself. So I think it's really good to keep that in mind for everything that you're working with. How can I use the AI tool to help make this as accessible as possible for my students? All right, and I have a handful of additional ideas that I'm not going to go into too much detail on, but just things for you guys to think about, different ways you might be able to use AI tools to make it a little bit easier to plan your classes, especially if you're coming into a brand new class. I think that these could be really helpful. So looking at course mapping and sequencing, or maybe if you already have been teaching a class for a while and you're like, something weird's happening between weeks 3 and 9, what can I do to maybe make this flow a little bit better? But saying like, okay, I've got these learning outcomes, suggest a logical sequence of weekly topics and major assignments for a 15-week course. Just give me something to work with. And that may be something where you get an output from that and you're like, okay, well, that looks totally different than what I do in my class. Some of that will work and some of it totally won't, but you can kind of move around there. And it's a good place just to get started. Syllabus drafting, I think most of us, depending on what institution you're coming from, but I imagine most institutions have some sort of syllabus template that you can work with that'll give you the sections that are required, the different things that you need to cover, and of course, all our policy language. But some of the sections where you have a little more control, sometimes it's hard to get started. And sometimes it's good to have the AI tool give you just like a base couple sentences that you can then embellish upon, change around a little bit, use it as an idea and things that you can add to it. Can also make sure that you're actually covering all of those sections. So if I have a hard time making sure that I'm explaining exactly what the quizzes are for in the class, the AI tool might be able to give me a really good description of what I'm aiming for, and then I can, make it fit a little bit better with what I actually am saying and what I want my students to hear from that. Weekly or module overviews, really helpful. I like to, in my online classes, have at least a paragraph overview for each week. And I also like to do weekly welcome announcements. So welcome to week 7. This is what we're going to be covering this week. I can definitely write that myself, right? But I think that one of the nice things about having an AI tool assist you with that is making sure that you're hitting all the things that you're covering that week and that it's following a similar structure. So students know on Monday mornings in my classes that they're going to get kind of a welcome. They're going to get, here's some key ideas for you to focus on even before you jump into the class and start looking around. Here's your to-do list. And then here's like a final reflection thought. So just making sure that I'm hitting those same ideas week after week. Again, I'm sure that we all could do that ourselves, but it does just kind of keep you on track with it, make it a little bit easier to do that. And kind of the same ideas coming up with analogies or examples. You can use AI tools to come up with case studies or scenarios that your students could work through for activities that you could talk through to kind of drive the points home. I know that many of us will have a handful of these ready, but having some new ones to spice things up or that are maybe a little bit more tied to this specific fall 2025, what's going on right now, or what's happened in the last year that maybe is a little bit more up to date and applicable for your students right now. Um, Guiding feedback templates. I am in no way advocating for using AI to do any grading for you. That is definitely something that I think faculty should be doing for themselves, is providing that one-to-one feedback to their students where necessary. But sometimes you've said the same thing over and over again, and you just need to kind of have another way to phrase it for your students, especially if it's not landing. If you have students who are still having problems with sentence fragments on the third paper, okay, help me talk about sentence fragments in another way. I don't advocate for saying taking any of your students' writing and dropping it into an AI tool. That's intellectual property question marks abound. But kind of saying like my students have a hard time with sentence fragments, or I have a student who continuously uses lowercase I when they should be using capital I. How can I approach this? How can I give them feedback about this? How can I advise them on looking for this and fixing this problem themselves in their own writing? So kind of that describing the problem to them and then to the tool and then having it give you kind of feedback that you can work with from there can be helpful. Generating study guides or practice questions. That is a good place to get started with. I've done some work with looking at working with ChatGPT or other AI tools to probably help me come up with quiz questions or test questions, and they're generally way too simple. It's like you kind of just have to be breathing and you can kind of guess the answers to them. That's just been my experience. Maybe you guys have gotten a little bit more in depth with yours, but generally maybe for study guides, it's helpful, but I'm not sure if I'd rely too heavily, at least on the free version of ChatGPT, for actually developing quiz questions. And then finally, reflection or metacognitive prompts. So for your students, after finishing a unit or a big test or a big project, having them think about what they learned and kind of, do just like a quick writing or a quick discussion in class, really driving home what they did. So it may not be part of your practice, your teaching practice now, but the AI tool can help you kind of come up with different ways you can integrate these ideas to improve things and make things a little bit more interesting for your students. All right, I think that might be the last of my slides. I guess from there, and I do want to take your questions, but I wanted to see if anybody here had any other cool ways that they're using generative AI in designing their own courses or questions. I'm not sure if this is all about the AI tool that TMCC has available. I haven't played with that too much yet. So maybe I'm relying too much on ChatGPT when I should be relying on our in-house.
Well, one of the things with the in-house tool is that you don't have to worry about any student information or student generated content going anywhere because it stays in-house on our server.
I think that's definitely helpful. I think that knowing that it's not just going out and feeding into
Right.
other people's other models and things like that would definitely make me feel better.
And along the lines of what you presented on the AI Information Hub under the faculty section, we have similar exercise where we took a course and created an in-class exercise going all the way through creating the case study that the students should be working with as well. So it just shows how you can iterate and grow an exercise into all the material and have it based on a chapter in the book as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that iterate, start with something. Sometimes I feel when I'm working with ChatGPT, it's almost like I've got it right where I want to. I'm finally, I'm going to get exactly what I want now. I did enough prompts back and forth. We're right where we need to be. And then it's like, you've used up your allotment for ChatGPT 5 for the day. But it's still, even if you go back to 4.5 or whatever it is, it still does pretty good for you.
And for us, we don't have a limit.
That's good. That's good. See, there's another, I need to play more with this. One person asked if you get a copy of the presentation. I'm going to drop that into the chat. And I think it's also going to be made available on a web page somewhere from this.
We will, when we put the video presentation up, we'll also include any material that we receive from the presenters.
All right, a couple other questions. Or Sierra said, I make games using generative AI as characters in the games. That's really helpful. I think that coming up with inventive uses like games, I'm not really good at that myself. I'm kind of thinking about, okay, how can I put ChatGPT to work to like create a Jeopardy game for my class for a study session? Because I've never been able to come up with enough for that myself in years of teaching things. So thinking about using it for games, I think is really interesting. A couple more. I've used AI to help create alt text for Canvas course. I think that for alt text, it's so helpful. It's never going to be perfect first shot, but neither would what I would create. And sometimes writing the alt text is just the straw that breaks the camel's back when you're just like, I thought I was done with my lecture presentation. So having at least something to work with there, it makes it a little bit easier for you to be that superstar accessibility instructor. Are there any, Fred asks, are there any best practices for engaging students in using AI? The notion would be to educate and promote ethical and appropriate use. How many activities or assignments should be used? I am not sure I'm qualified at this point to speak on that. I want to start using some AI activities in my classes, but it just seems like, and I've heard instructors say this for years, that it's so much work to make sure that it's going to work well. I want to make sure I'm even hesitant. I would have loved to have done some demos for you guys with these prompts that I was putting up on this presentation, but I'm just so hesitant to pull up an AI tool in class and have it do exactly what I'm hoping it does with my students live. Maybe that's something that I feel a little more confident with if I got accustomed to the TMCC model. But just in general, I'm like, what if we get like a Mecha Hitler Grok situation from the summer, something like that could just completely derail the course. And I also worry about asking students or making students use AI for assignments, because I still think, even though it is coming, I think that at some point in their futures, they're probably going to have to use AI tools. I worry about making them engage with something that they might have ethical questions about. So I would say maybe one best practice that I can get out without knowing too much more is, if you're planning on doing AI activities with your students, make sure to have a separate activity that doesn't require them to interact with the tool themselves. So it could be, here is an activity for people who are willing to engage with the tool, and here's an activity that covers the same learning objectives but doesn't make students actually log into ChatGPT. Or that it's something that you could do for the class. So, okay, class, I'm in front of class. Let's put together a prompt together and go through this together. I do think that another couple activities that I've heard of is having students, kind of to show them what an AI tool can do and how it's maybe not 100% trustworthy, is to work with AI output and then kind of show students where maybe it falls flat in different ways. Maybe from your specific area of expertise, you could say, look, this isn't really going in depth where it needs to in these different aspects. It's really just scratching the surface. I've talked to my students, I've shown them like, hey, here's an AI output of our paper. And it's like, yeah, doesn't it? I don't feed them this, but I've had students say, before I even let them know that it's AI produced, feels kind of soulless. I mean, obviously the AI tools are going to get better and better, but it kind of can help you to give them the ideas that they can kind of get to themselves. So I'm sure there's a lot more best practices with that. I think that a couple of different people might be working with designing assignments with AI in mind, or designing assignments where students can actually work with AI. But I don't know.
And then Brian's got a note in there as well.
Oh, using AI to generate sample data sets in their decision models. Wow, I feel like that's gotta be helpful to come up with a lot of data kind of quickly, especially if it's just kind of something to practice and work with. It doesn't need to be real. It's just something they need to practice the mechanics of what you're working with on. I think that's probably a really good use for it. Felicia's talking about transparency with students, letting them know when and how you used AI to help with your lesson planning. And I try to do that as much as possible, letting them know like, okay, this is where I've gotten this. Sometimes it's like, okay, well, this lecture is 99% mine, and I just got one example off of the AI. I'm probably not going to do a timeout unless I say, just letting everybody know this is from ChatGPT, but I try to be transparent where I can. Have I received any pushback from students about my use of AI, especially as I navigate difficult conversations with students who are using AI themselves? That's a really good question because I think that, and Felicia teaches English as well, so we're constantly working with students who are unsure of the times that it's okay to use AI and when it's not. So kind of pushing the boundaries with that. One of the things that I try to make clear to my students from the beginning in my class is that they're in this class in English 101, English 102 to develop their skills. And that they're once they develop those skills, they may in time come to work with AI tools, but they need to have the skills themselves so they can tell when the AI tools are falling flat and not doing a good job and not communicating properly as they themselves now know how to do it because they're superstars in Kathy's English 101 and 102 classes. So when I talk to them about my use of AI, I talk to them about how I go about doing it, how I still go through and decide as the instructor what's going to work best and what's not. I'm very involved in the process, kind of modeling what eventually, if they work with AI in their future careers, what they should be doing too. That really, really thoughtful use of AI, and explaining to them, this is why it's one of the tools that I use in my lesson planning and why it's okay for me to do it and why it's not okay for them to use it for their papers. Kind of feeds into that. I think it does keep coming back to me saying like, we're developing your skills. I don't want to say we're developing your skills, but I've already got all the skills. But that might also kind of be kind of an undercurrent. Does that make sense, Felicia? Awesome. All right. And so you're sharing a bunch of different resources, Teaching Naked. Is it Ethan Mollick is it Ethan Mollick? That second source is one of the biggest names you see like constantly with the AI and teaching stuff right now. There's also, I'm not sure if TMCC has an EDUCAUSE account, but I've subscribed to a couple of different discussion groups with them, like AI and teaching. There's a bunch of cool stuff coming through there.
I got asked to unmute. This is Sierra, and yes, you are talking about Ethan Mulk. Got great resources on there. Teaching Naked is Jose Bowen's website. He's got a ton of stuff on there that can really help you. And Kevin Yee, this book that's an open resource book is just packed full of ideas of different ways to incorporate Gen AI into your class.
Awesome. I still feel like we're all still, we're what, almost 4 years on from when ChatGPT hit the scene. And it still feels like we're just drinking from the fire hose with a lot of this stuff. There's just so many ideas out there that it's almost like I just need like 3 new ideas a week for me to cogitate over and see if I can actually make it work for my class or not. Instead of just, some of these things, it feels like it's a lot, but wouldn't it be nice if there was just somebody putting together just a quick little listserv that just gave you a couple ideas and you could be like, oh, I like one of those, forget the other 2. I'm not volunteering to do that, by the way.
You can be a regular contributor to our newsletter.
All right. I'm not sure if anybody has any other questions. I am available if I share the PowerPoint, but if anybody wants to talk about any of the other things in this presentation, any of the prompts or anything that, what has worked or hasn't worked for you, please feel free to email me. I'm going to throw my email into the chat again.
Thank you so much, Kathy. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.